Hello everyone and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. Recently, my wife and I kind of got to the end of some large goals that we've been working towards for a while now. I think we ended up tweeting about it, but I think it's worth kind of retroactively looking back and talking about how that all began. Because I think, oftentimes people will look at the fruits of something and they'll assume that you just kind of make it there, right? When the reality is that there's a lot of sacrifice and hard work and preparation that goes into achieving something. So I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I think we're kind of reaching the end of a certain kind of chapter in our lives, especially with our kid on the way. But also, I think our parents are reaching kind of a new chapter, so I want to talk about that a little bit. But I think it's probably best to start at the beginning. So, approximately, 5 years ago, we were finishing up our last year in college, right?
I'm trying to think, 5 years. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we were married because we got married the year before our last year of college.
Yeah. So it was our last year in college. We were married, and I think right around this time of year, we were sitting down and kind of planning out what it is that we were going to do after college.
Yeah, like your 5-year plan, right? That's
yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how well you remember this, but I recall sitting down and pulling out a whiteboard, because we had one for doing our engineering work on. And
I remember the whiteboard chat.
Yeah, and the whiteboard chat. That's how it's filed away in your mind. Interesting moniker. Well, I remember sitting down at the whiteboard and talking about...
In our tiny little 400 square foot apartment.
Yeah. Laying a whiteboard on the ground, and I remember asking you, what things do you and do we value? Like, what things are most critical to us? Because it's from those kind of values and things that we care about that our goals and our dreams will kind of stem from.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't the first time we had talked about that. Like,
No.
we talked about that in premarital counseling as well. But I do remember sitting down with a whiteboard and basically mapping out, like, here are the priorities and goals we have in our life, short-term, long-term, whatever.
Yeah, I remember, I think the question was phrased something like, over the next 5 years, like, what matters most? And we just started by brainstorming and talking about a bunch of things that we liked or that we cared about. So some of those things were more pragmatic, like, wanting to make sure that we tithed, and other things were much more fun, like, well, I really like going on trips, going on vacations, right? And
that one's interesting because I do think I said that and I don't care about that anymore. I tweeted about that this week. Like, I don't really care about traveling anymore very much. I don't know why.
You had it higher on the list, and it wasn't of high importance to me. And I remember kind of talking about that, but working it into our plan. But I remember we wrote out a bunch of things, and then we kind of rank ordered them, right, hierarchically, and talked about them. And one of the things that was at the top of the list, or near the top, was we had a large emphasis on wanting to have financial stability for kids. Right?
Yeah. And specifically, you kind of pressed a very specific goal of you wanted to buy a townhouse. And you wanted to pay it off before we had the first kid.
Yeah, I think
and
I specifically said
feeling
4 years, but yeah.
Okay, I remember feeling like I remember trying to reel you back from that a little bit because I was like, That is
Yeah.
very, very lofty goal in my mind. And I didn't want to wait as long as I thought it was going to take.
Yeah.
To have kids.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to wait that long.
Yeah.
But I remember walking through kind of some rough numbers, guesses, and it was going to be a very big stretch. And then I think the kind of quote unquote compromise was you were like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be all the way paid off, but like
I think I said 80%.
If we could be like 80% of the way there.
Yeah.
When the first kid is born, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something like that.
That was our kind of real back
That was
goal.
our more realistic but still quite lofty goal.
Yeah. And I mean, we had other things on the list as well, whether that be retirement or enjoying things. Like we had other goals, and there were goals on the list beyond financial, but I think that was a big part of the discussion, right? Where are we going to live? What's that going to look like? What are we allocating a lot of resources to?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, sitting here, 5 years-ish later from then, we've got our paid off and renovated house, and we did it on the timeline or slightly before, despite actually, this is one part of it I think you forget. The budget that we had set for our townhouse purchase ended up increasing.
Yeah, when we started looking, the budget we were trying to buy, we realized it was not really realistic to get something.
The market was kind of going crazy.
The market was going a little crazy. It was not realistic to buy something.
Yeah.
In that price range, so we had to increase that a little bit, what we were willing to spend, and with that we had to adjust our expected timeline accordingly.
Yeah.
And then somehow, here we are 5 years later, like, by the grace of God, it feels like a fluke to me that we somehow actually managed to do it in our original timeline, because
I am pretty good at estimating things, though.
I'm due next month, and we just, I'm gonna say almost flukily, were able to like pay it off this month. Part of that was we took some money we were saving for something else and decided to reallocate it, but
well, sure, but we did what we said we were going to do on the timeline that we said we were going to do it based on
the timeline that you very optimistically thought was possible at the beginning, and I was like, no.
It was a well-informed estimate.
Okay. It feels like a fluke to me, and I feel very, I'm not unaware of how we have been very much blessed to be able to do that, and the significance of that is not lost on me.
Well, okay,
but it does feel a little bit like a fluke to me, to be honest.
So I agree. Obviously, we're very blessed. Okay, but that isn't necessarily enough. There are plenty of people who are just as blessed and don't end up in that situation. And I think a great example is, I think we've brought this up on the podcast before, but the new engineer test, which is, you can kind of pick your timeline, whether it's a year or 2 years or whatever. But when somebody graduates as an engineer, the clock starts, and you see how long it takes them to go out and buy a new or very expensive luxury type of car.
With their new engineering salary.
With their new fancy schmancy engineering salary. And I swear, almost everyone fails on, if you look at it on like a 2-year time horizon.
They fail that test. They go out and buy a new car. Yeah, like
almost every single time.
We joked about it with like all our friends and whatever, because we had a lot of friends who were also in engineering from college.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, buddy, you failed. Like, you lasted 6 months, but you went out and you bought your new Honda Civic, brand new, right off the lot. You failed.
Yeah. Well, and look, there's nothing wrong with a Honda Civic, or there's nothing wrong with going out and getting a car, but it's just going out and spending a bunch of money on a depreciating asset right after
Brand
you
new.
get
Yeah.
your fancy engineering salary.
And you're like, oh, I
It's
can do this now.
It's just kind of shooting yourself in the foot a little bit most of the time.
Yeah.
And we didn't do that. So my point is, like, it requires sacrifice.
We do kind of pride ourselves on not failing that test. To this day, we have not bought any new car, actually.
We have not purchased any car
that we did not have at that time.
We were very blessed. Your parents...
We had that car. I'm saying since we graduated.
Yeah.
We have not bought any new car. New or used.
Yeah.
New or new to us.
Yeah. So my point is, it requires a lot of sacrifice. Like, we hardly ever go out to eat. And even if we do, it's very, very cheap. Like Chipotle kind of thing. Right?
Yeah. I mean, we are pretty frugal.
I guess what I would say, on top of, yes, we made sacrifices to get here, I think people in general are capable of far more than what they think. Like, this isn't the first time where we've sat down and we've made a very distinctive plan to try and achieve something that seems unfathomable. But as you pick, like, an end date and you walk it backwards, right? So if I want to get something done in X amount of time, then I should probably have it halfway done in 1/2 X amount of time, right? And you can put up a bunch of different, like, stages, milestones for you to hit. This isn't the first time that we've done this, right? We did this when we were trying to graduate college. Not only the timeline that we were trying to graduate college in, but also graduating college without debt, right? Mm-hmm. And here's another great example. While we were doing this paying off the house thing, at the very beginning of COVID, I sat us down and I turned to you and I said, at the end of this, there are going to be two groups of people. There's going to be a group that gained 20 pounds eating Cheetos and watching Friends reruns. And then there's going to be a group who were hyper productive and knocked out a bunch of different things and really took the time that they had and maximized it. And I said to you, we are going to be in that second group. And we're going to make a plan on things that we are constantly going to be doing, especially during this time, so that we're in that second group.
Yeah, I remember that.
Like, we had a distinctive conversation and we made a list of goals, again, hierarchically outlined on what it is that we wanted to do. We had a litany of house projects that we did. I went back to school. Mm-hmm. All of this, if you went back in time and said, over X amount of time, you're trying to accomplish this, you would have said, probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, cheesily, right? It's really empowering to be able to set those goals and work towards them, not because you can then achieve something you wanted to achieve, but in the future you can look back and be reminded of where you've come from, right? Yeah. When you lay out a goal physically and you cross it off a list, like, I think 2020, that was the first year we started doing that, where we actually have a piece of paper, and we're tech people, we don't put things on paper, but we have a physical piece of paper. We started writing out goals for every year and crossing them off as we get through them. And I mean, we don't complete all the goals every year by any means, because we
don't.
We put stretches on there for sure to kind of push us, but it's empowering to be able to look back and remember the things you were hoping for. Writing those things down allows you to be able to remember when you hadn't achieved that thing and you were just hoping to.
Yeah.
And there's something really empowering about that, I think.
I mean, you had mentioned we don't necessarily hit all the goals. And yeah, of course, we don't. But sometimes
No.
there's a kind of shoot for the stars and you might just hit the moon type mentality here.
Yeah. Like this year I put a goal on there that I wanted to do. One of my goals was I wanted to be able to like do pull-ups. I wanted to be able to do like a pull-up.
Oh,
Wasn't
unassisted?
that what it was? I think I had, yeah.
I thought there was an assisted number.
Maybe there was
a
less than... I should look back at what it was. I as you can see, I ruled out this goal a long time ago because I got pregnant. And then that wasn't really feasible. But I had a goal that was under X amount of weight pull-ups for reps. And then in April I found out I was pregnant and it was like, okay, well that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I think one of the keys to this though is you kind of have to first recognize that there's actually a decision to be made and sit down and have that conversation where you're serious and you're setting some kind of goal, right? Like starting is one of the hardest parts. Like I've kind of talked about that on the podcast before, but one of the hardest things is just actually saying to yourself and committing to doing X thing. And then outlining that plan and working on following through. Not just talking the talk, but actually doing it and having that plan. Like you have to do it conscientiously. Like sitting down and having the whiteboard conversation. I don't know if you remember how long that was, but if I recall correctly, that was, well, first off, it was actually a few different bouts of the conversation where we were kind of walking through stuff. But if I had to total up the amount of time that we spent discussing those things, I think it was probably about 6 hours total.
Maybe. You like to sit and talk about things for a very long time.
Well, okay, but let me ask you this. Is 6 hours to plan the next 5 years of your life really that much? Like, no, it's a drop in the bucket. But when you force yourself to put it on paper and you put the time in to actually do that and to think critically and conscientiously about what it is that you want, that's when you're able to actually achieve those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're probably not going to stumble your way into achieving some great thing that you want to achieve.
Yeah. Well, and look, this applies to more than just, something financial. Like, we had a series at church recently where people were talking about, how it is that they saw themselves. And something that just struck me is you can just decide today that you want to be a different kind of person. Like, if you're not a happy person, you can decide today that you want to be a happy, joyful kind of person and outline some steps, and like you can become that. You can just be a different kind of person. Like if you're sitting here and you're living your life, and if you were going to draft yourself into a life and you wouldn't pick your own, I think you should sit down and ask yourself some really serious questions. And when you think about that, not just, oh, well, it would be awesome to be born into some unbelievably wealthy family. Like, first off, no. Maybe a better question is, are you the person that you want to be given your setup? And if the answer is no, then sounds like you got some work to do. Sounds like you should be outlining some changes that you want to make. Speaking of which, my parents recently went through some kind of bigger life changes because both myself and my sister in the past 5 or 6 years went off and left the house, off to college, and got married. Okay? So they're empty nesters, it's kind of the saying. And they asked themselves, what do we want the next decade of our life to look like? Because when you have kids, I imagine to some degree, you've signed up for a 18 to 20 year track, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your life, at least to some degree, is focused on your children. And now they're past that. So whatever autopilot they were on, where the emphasis was on their kids, that's kind of gone, right? You have to forge this whole new path. And something I really respect them for is, instead of doing what we've talked about before, where they tried to relive their dream from 20 years ago, instead of trying to do that, they dreamed again. They asked, what does our dream look like now? And then they did that. And for them, what it looked like is, my dad really loves being on water, being on a boat, rivers, lakes, stuff like that. And they really didn't want all that much more than to be on a river or a lake and relatively close to family. So they moved to this super, super small house. It's smaller than our townhome in square footage. And like, it's a 1-bedroom place, and it's on the water. And my dad got a boat, and my mom got like some kayaks or something, and that's what they do. They live that dream that they have that has been updated. They didn't buy the McMansion that they wanted when my sister and I were young. Mm-hmm. And, not everyone's dream looks like that. I remember we had a teacher in high school who, when he retired, him and his wife sold their house, bought an RV, and just drove around the country. Mm-hmm. That was their entire plan. Because they loved road tripping and hanging out on the road, seeing a different place every single day. They just love that. Now, that's not for me, but I so respect that was your thing and you just went all in. I think your parents are kind of reaching that point, because you've got a younger sibling and you just went off to school.
My parents are at the point in their life now, as of this year, where I think they probably need to start thinking about that.
They have to start dreaming again.
Yeah, like I have a brother who's more significantly younger than me, than your sister is you. Mm-hmm. So he just graduated high school this year and went off to college. So this is the year my parents are empty nesters. And it's very new.
Well, for the first time in how long? It's obviously very
new for them. Well, I'm 26, so...
Yeah, so for the first time in a quarter century, they have to all of a sudden...
Which is like half their life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think they're at the point now where they need to start thinking about that. And they're probably wrestling with that a little bit of like, well, what does that look like now? What does our life look like? What do we want to be doing? And they have started to make some changes. Like, my mom has a business that she runs, and she's kind of going to be scaling back from that. My mom always drove a minivan. The minivan unexpectedly broke down.
They got forced into
that a couple months ago, so they got forced to get rid of the minivan. That was a big change for her that I think she's still wrestling with a little bit, because she's been driving a minivan ever since I was a baby. And
well, that's kind of a symbolic change.
But she's having to realize, like, I don't have a need for a minivan anymore.
That's kind of a symbolic change, though, too, right? Because the minivan is really set up for, I've got a bunch of kids. And I feel like for her, not having the minivan is so emblematic of, I don't have kids in my house anymore.
Kids in the house, yeah.
Yeah.
To tote around, right. Yeah, and she got used to the convenience of just being able to haul big stuff. But yeah, I do think there's this almost like emotional factor to it.
There definitely is.
So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what my parents' new dream is. Like, I don't know that they know. I think
they don't
they
know.
need to figure that. I think they need to figure it out.
They need to dream again.
Yeah. They need to figure out what that looks like. And they're kind of going through that right now, I think. And honestly, I mean, we probably are getting to a point where we need to start thinking about what is the next thing for us now. Like,
certainly.
We're kind of coming up on, our lives are going to be changing a lot in the next few months here. I don't know, maybe it's time for another whiteboard discussion. We need to talk about the next 5, 10, 15 years, I guess. I don't know. But I think it's something that everyone, like, you should be doing. Like, it doesn't matter. I don't think it matters where you're at financially in life, you know, where you're at spiritually or relationally. Like, any point you're at, you should be having goals that you're driving towards. Like, I don't think you ever really should be taking this, oh, I'm here, I made it, now I'm done. And that doesn't mean you're not grateful for where you're at or
you're saying
what you've
people
done.
Shouldn't sit on the sidelines,
right?
With their lives.
I think you shouldn't stay stagnant, because I don't think it's good for the human psyche either. Like, I think there's something very healthy about productively working towards goals. You know, like, it's why just mentally, I think you feel better after a day where you just got a lot of good stuff done.
You crushed it, yeah.
Now, it's nice to have relaxing days every now and again, but if you're doing nothing all day long, every day, I think most people, maybe this is optimistic of me, but I think most people are going to start to feel pretty crappy pretty fast if you're not doing anything. And I think that extends more broadly in life. Like, you should be having goals that you're always working towards and defining. And achieve those goals. Celebrate them. That's great. Like, don't diminish where you are now or what you've done to get there, but always be looking for what's the next thing to start working on.
Well, and the other thing is, your goals, they don't need to be some flashy thing, right? Oh, I want this car or this house or to have this money or something. Like,
no.
Your goal could be, you know what? Every day this year I want to spend X amount of time reading my Bible. Every week this year I want to see my family, make time for them, X hours.
Right. I want to invest in this relationship in my life.
Yeah. I want to volunteer this many hours. Like, if you're retired, those are awesome goals. Or maybe you want to be able to walk, 2 miles straight if you're retired and older. Like, great. Have that as a goal then. Like, work up to that. That's awesome. But I agree. I think you need to have something that you're working towards and that you're dreaming towards. So if you're wanting to connect with your family more, right, your dream is to have one of those families that's just so tight-knit. Your dream is to have just like an unshakable faith. Your dream is to be the kind of grandparent who can chase their kids around or their grandkids around even in old age, right? Like, you gotta have those dreams. Yeah. I think ultimately, if you don't make those conscientious decisions about what you're going to do with your time, you fall into some defaults, right? That time naturally gets spent, and oftentimes that means it gets wasted.
Yeah, I've found that for sure. Like, if you start to go into a period of time in your life where you have time freed up, or this same thing applies with money too. Like, you have more room in your budget or whatever. Like, if you don't make a plan for what you're going to do with your time, if you don't make a plan for what you're going to do with that extra money that you start getting now, it's going to just go away. Like, you're effectively going to feel like you didn't actually gain the money or the time because you weren't intentional about what you're doing with it.
Yeah. I think another big component of this that I've found real helpful is having somebody to hold you accountable. Because you mentioned earlier when we have our yearly goals, right? We hold each other accountable for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast, but we have weekly meetings where you and I sit down and we talk about how last week went, how next week went. Where we talk about how last week went, what we're going to do next week, changes that we want to make. We hit on key things like how we've been eating.
I just realized how next week went was...
Yeah.
It was a little slow. I realized why that didn't make sense.
Yeah.
About 15 seconds later.
Right. And we're hitting on those critical daily habits and what goals we want to achieve, and we review that every week so that I get some feedback for how I'm doing progressing towards that goal. And I've got a friend who he doesn't have a significant other, and I just noticed that his goals and what he's trying to do seems to so drastically change, and because of that it seems like it's kind of difficult for him to like hit a target.
Just lacking consistent direction.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason for that is like accountability. If he had somebody who was weekly checking in on, are you working towards the things that you want to work towards, then I think that he'd be getting where he would want to go.
But I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of people, even if they are in a couple, like, they don't necessarily do that with each other.
Sure, but I feel like my job as a husband, at least in part, is to help you be the person who you want to be. Not to help you do what you want to do right now, but for you to get to the point that when you really sit down and conscientiously think about something, when you dream, when you set up goals, to help you get to that point that you actually want to be at on a deeper level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we take that charge of being like partners in life maybe more literally than some people do, in that like we're partnering on like a project almost. Like, that sounds maybe weird or bad, but it's like there's this life that you're living,
mm-hmm.
and we're partnering on that. That means we help each other and we push each other, and we're going through this together as partners,
mm-hmm.
trying to achieve some end result.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I mean, we do a lot of projects together, whether that's house projects but whether you want to formalize it or kind of generalize it, we do a lot.
Yeah, we enjoy doing
projects.
stuff like that.
But I think part of like a project is kind of like a micro example of this, right? Because when you embark on a project, you have to ask yourself, where is it that I want to be with this? How is it that we're going to get there? And then we work together. Even if one person's doing it, it's good to have a second person there saying, hey, what's happening with this? Poking you, going, hey, I need
mm-hmm.
you to work with me here. And the other thing is, when you have someone who's kind of pushing you in that direction, I think it makes making the sacrifices easier, right? And it's going to take a lot of sacrifice.
You're not doing it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like if you are looking to achieve some dream, if you're trying to knock out a goal, it's going to take a ton of sacrifice. And it's probably going to take a bunch of sacrifice from your partner as well. Like when I was going back to school to get my degree, we sat down and I said to you, if I'm doing a bunch of schoolwork at the end of the day, I can't be doing as much around the house. So I need your support
mm-hmm.
by doing more around the house while I'm, upstairs writing papers.
Mm-hmm.
And then me knowing, she's downstairs picking up the slack for me, that pushes me to right? Not screw around, to get this done, to knock it out. And I think when you have alignment, not only on what the goal is, what the dream is, but on the why that's behind it, you can make those sacrifices and work together so much easier.
Yeah, I do think it's maybe underrated, the value of somewhere, whether it's physically on a piece of paper or in a note on your phone or something, actually writing down some tangible goals, though. Like,
Yeah.
you find stuff like that in the business world, right? And there's a reason why companies do that. They set out goals, and they set, employees have to set goals for the year, and you have to document your progress and these kinds of things. There's a reason why companies have employees do that.
Yeah, because it works.
Because it works. Yeah, it's effective. When you actually think about goals, you put them into words, you put some kind of measurability on them, and you write them down and document them somewhere you can go back and look at it. There's an effectiveness that comes with that I think a lot of people probably don't fully realize. And I mean, I've seen that a lot since we started doing that, because we didn't always do that. It was just the past few years here that we've started doing that, and I think it has made a big difference in what we've been able to accomplish.
Yeah. Something that I think I tweeted this kind of near the beginning of the year, actually. But I referenced the SMART goals thing. If you're not aware of that, it's an acronym. It's 5 characteristics that your goals should have, and they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound.
Yeah.
And I think that's it's from the workplace.
Typical corporate jargon right there.
Yeah, but well, sure, but it's derived
I know, there's
from
some value in
principles.
it. There's some value in it. I get that. Yeah. That's my whole point. It's like, we can haha corporate jargon, but like, there is a reason why, and it actually can be effective if you implement that in your personal life.
Well, and the other thing is, like, you may kind of scoff at it on the corporate level because you go, that's some BS and I don't really care about it.
I'm just here for a paycheck.
Yeah, you're just here for the paycheck. But when it's your life and you care about it and you have that investment.
Well, and maybe that's part of the problem, right? Like, people need to have an investment in your life, right?
Yeah.
You need to have that personal investment and desire to make your life what you want it to be. I do think a lot of people go through their lives just kind of going through the motions, like living for the next day. Like, the first step before you can set goals before you can even think about what you would want your goals to be down the road, is you need to have a personal investment in your life and the trajectory of your life. And sadly, I think there are a lot of people who maybe don't have that, or they don't really work to cultivate that sense of, I don't know what you want to call it, like personal duty over their life. Like, I think you have a duty to do the best with the life you have, right?
Yeah.
Not just get by and survive. And that does look very different for different people, and that's okay. That's a good thing, actually.
Yeah.
But you need to have a personal investment in your life and where it's going. And you need to care about your life, because your life is worth caring about. I don't care who you are. Your life is worth caring about. You're here for a reason. Yeah. There's something to do with your life.
I think about that, the meme that's taken from The Notebook. You know, the one, like, what do you want? What do you want?
Yeah.
I feel that way with some people, where it's like they're just kind of meandering through everything. And I just want to shake them and go, what do you want? Because you can do it. If your thing is, it would be so cool if I could drive, or if I could own a 911.
Yeah.
Right. That would just be the coolest thing. Okay, well, you can make the sacrifices
or
to get to that point.
Start taking steps in that direction, right? Like, that's the attainable part of your goal. Like, we didn't 5 years ago sit down and say, oh, we're gonna buy $1 million homestead and we're gonna pay it off in 5. Like, this is not attainable, right?
Yeah.
But you can make small steps in that direction, and there's a satisfaction towards making a progress. You can have your 20, 30, 40 year out goal. That's fine.
Yeah.
But you need some goals in between then to get yourself to that point. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people maybe don't think about those in between goals. They just sit here and they're like, well, here's where I am, and here's where I super lofty down the road would like to be. But there's so much standing in the way, and then you don't know where to start. You feel overwhelmed.
Well, like if let's say we take that car example, right? Someone's like, "Oh man, I want to have that Porsche 911." Okay, well, how long and how hard do you want to work for this? Is that actually your dream? Right? Because you can kind of start to make steps in a direction, then work your way towards honing it in more, right? Because maybe you get to some point where you've saved up a good deal of money over a couple years, and instead of buying a new one, right, you're buying something that's a number of years old. But then you realize, oh, actually, it's compromised in these couple of ways, and so this isn't exactly what I want, but I like these other things with it, right? And then you make steps in that direction, you get there over time. Like, I remember you asked me something like, oh, if we had just like a bunch of money, what would we do with it? And I outlined like just some kind of high level things that I'd probably do. And you asked me, oh, so you wouldn't go and build the dream house? And my response was, no, I don't know enough to build the dream house. Like, we've renovated this place, but I need to do this 2 or 3 more times to really understand
Not ready for that, yeah.
what it is that I would want, like all the little nuances. Because we did things to this place that I really like that we did or how we did it. But there are also things that I thought would be super awesome, and they're fine, they're good, but
I'd want to try
I'd do it a bit different.
Next time. Yeah.
Yeah. And you kind of learn and evolve over time. So I'm not ready to, even if I had the means to build, some dream house. Maybe whatever dream car you have isn't actually that thing.
Yeah, and I think that's part of where trying to cultivate like a conscientiousness around what is it that you want in your life, right? Like you can't just jump towards like writing down tangible goals on a paper. You need to start with the high level, like what you said with the whiteboard conversation. What are your values in life?
Yeah.
You need to figure that out. That's what they teach you in premarital counseling too, when you're trying to like align with your fiance about where you're headed in life and that kind of thing. Is your goals should stem from what your values are, right?
Yeah.
What you're working towards. And if you don't know what your values are, if you can't express what your values are on a piece of paper or just to someone else, you don't know what they are. You need to figure that out first.
Yeah.
Like, that's really the first step, I think.
Well, and I think part of what that looked like for us, because I think some people could sit here and go, well, what values result in paying off your house? Like, why is that the goal? Okay. So here are some of the values that at least I had. Feel free to chime in if there's something I'm missing, okay? So first off, I had this kind of naive, dumb dream in my mind of, if my kid comes to me and they're worried and concerned because a kid at school, their parents are like struggling financially and they're concerned about getting foreclosed on or kicked out of their home or something, I want to be able to just look my kid in the eye and tell them, you don't need to worry about that. And here's exactly why. And to be completely serious, because I don't lie to kids. So I want to be able to just look at them and go, look, some people can get kicked out of their house because they're working on paying it off. Our house is paid off. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, so the value is stability for children.
Yeah, and right. Stability for children and having an ability to help people when we need to, and having an ability to have freed up income and resources to pursue things that really matter to us, whether that's having a fun trip with our kids or
being able to
funding
give
kids
money.
college, giving to people, right? All of these things are freed up when we don't have a ton of our income tied up in going to paying on a house.
Mm-hmm.
And that coupled with, some kind of Dave Ramsey principles of not wanting to be, like a slave to whomever's lended that money. Those were some of the critical things that really informed that decision.
But you need to figure out what those values are, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are those things? Your goals don't need to be primarily financial. And, like,
No.
Financial goals are not the only goals we have by any means.
Yeah, we have a ton of others.
But,
it's just that's a little bit more tangible and straightforward to explain.
But, I mean, that really is the first step. Is you can't figure out where you're going if you don't even know where you're wanting to go. Or what's driving the reason for where you're wanting to go.
Yeah. Well, in summary, I think asking yourself what it is that you care about most, writing that down hierarchically, having those dreams, and then outlining what that looks like in a goal form, trying to keep some of those SMART goals in mind, and getting some accountability. I think with those things, you can really achieve far more than you would have thought possible. Mm-hmm. I've seen that time and time again in our lives, and I've seen it with tons of other people who really put their minds to it as well.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're married, like, I think you should be doing this together with your spouse, because you need to have common goals. Like, when we write out our goals for the year, we make 3 columns. One is my goals, the one specific to me, right? This is, I've decided I want to learn 50 new recipes, or read 40 books, or whatever.
Or do a pull-up.
Or do a pull-up that is never going to happen. Yeah. And you write in your column the goals that are more specific to you, but then we have a third column that's like our goals that we're going to do together, right?
Yeah.
That's, we want to finish this painting in this room of the house. Or
pay off the house, fund a car.
Yeah. I'm like totally blanking on what the other like joint goals are, but you get what I'm saying.
Was learning ASL.
Oh yeah, one of our goals for this year is we wanted to start taking ASL classes. That's not happened yet.
That's a tough L.
But the year's not over.
In our household.
Yes, but I guess my point is, if you're married, you should be setting, like, you can have your individual goals, but you should be talking about them still together.
Yeah.
And setting goals together, because you are a team, and you should be acting like a team working towards some common goals. Yeah. And if you're not married, that's okay. But find a trusted friend or pastor or family member or something who can keep you accountable for your goals.
Yeah.
Tell them about the things, and tell them once a month, check in on me. How are these things going? And maybe you can do that for them too. Because really, I mean, accountability is huge.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be married to be able to find accountability.
Accountability is really critical. I mean, you need someone who is going to ask you, did you get up and work out today? How do your end of month budget look like? Where you have to be honest with them. I know things can sometimes seem daunting and dreams can seem unattainable, but I really do think if you take the steps towards it, you can get to achieving way more of your dreams and goals than you'd think. I've really seen that a lot. It takes a lot of hard work and sacrifice, but you can get there, for sure. Well, with that, it's getting late. But recently, especially amid some of the SBF or FTX trials that have been going on, I've been thinking about cryptocurrency, and I think a lot of things are kind of problematic with it, but as technology, it's kind of interesting. At this point in time, I think it's more like a kind of a speculative stock where people are kind of gambling. It's especially with all the rug pulls that people are experiencing. It's just kind of the Wild West, right, for a bunch of scams. I think there's a lot of rhetoric about decentralized finance being the future, but if people were really serious about these things, if that was actually a key and core component to it, I think things like ZKP's zero knowledge proofs, I think that would be a good kind of first step into implementing some of these additional technologies, whether that's in sites on the internet or with things on, with the government to increase privacy. Because if we cared about decentralizing finances and privacy, then this would be kind of a good foot in the door. So I'd really like to see zero knowledge proofs used a lot more. I think at the end of the day, crypto's biggest asset is also kind of its biggest weakness, and that's that its quick rise to fame and the potential to make money with it. These allow it to get a lot of eyeballs and in the minds of a lot of people, but it kind of makes it into a speculative thing, and that's not something that you want out of a true currency. These things will kind of need to be shed by it if it is going to be used as a true currency that doesn't radically fluctuate. It's always kind of interesting when something technical like cryptocurrency or the blockchain gets on the kind of everyday person's radar. I'd love to see that with zero knowledge proofs, because I think that would be a good foray into the kind of crypto world and something that's maybe a bit less ripe for controversy, and it could bring cryptocurrency into something that actually is useful in the future. But that's just what I've been musing about recently. If you have any thoughts on dreams and goals, being conscientious about them, or on cryptocurrency, feel free to shoot us an email at secondpartypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for listening, and have a good night.